want to read you just one illustration of that from our study in the story. So turn in your Bibles to 2 Chronicles chapter 33. 2 Chronicles chapter 33. And I'm going to show you something here that is unimaginable. I'm going to show you a picture of you and me in God's story. A picture, perhaps, of America. A picture of our families. It's right here in God's story. I am in God's story. You are in God's story. I want to show you something about God's unimaginable grace. Now, friends, the word grace means unmerited favor. What does the word unmerited mean? It means that we don't deserve it. So if I were to ask all of us today, who here amongst us deserves to be loved, to be forgiven by God? I don't think any one of us could stand up and say that. Can you? Do you deserve to be blessed of the Lord? Do you deserve to be redeemed, restored? And yet God does that. Your case is not hopeless. You're not washed out. It's not over. But you've got to hear what God says about His unimaginable grace. So I want to just read this to you. It's about a man by the name of Manasseh. 2 Chronicles chapter 33 and verse 1. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. Here's what he did. He rebuilt the high places that his father Hezekiah had broken down, and he erected altars to the Baals and made Asheroth. And he worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. Everybody just look at me. Let me give you a little explanation. The pagan gods of the day of Manasseh, there were many of them. But you will remember going back even into 1 Kings to the time of Elijah. Remember when Elijah went and he stood on Mount Carmel and he confronted the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Asherah. Asherah, A-H, at the end of that word. And Asheroth, R-O-T-H, was an idol. Now watch this, folks. Asherah, the god Asherah, was one of the Assyrian and Philistine gods. This god was a female deity, a pagan god, and became associated with groves, G-R-O-V-E, wood, forest groves. And the worship of Asherah, this strange god, would take place in these groves, and they would take the trunk of trees and they would carve their idol god Asherah into these tree trunks in these groves, and they would offer sacrifices, and there were tremendous immorality involved because this was a female deity. So the goddess Asherah gave to these people permission to act immorally. And so they gave themselves over to immoral practices. So an Asheroth was a pole that was an idol symbolizing the worship of the goddess Asherah. Remember now, God said, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And you'll remember when Elijah went onto the top of Mount Carmel, there were 850 prophets of Baal, B-A-A-L, or Baal in the Hebrew tongue. All right, remember the word A-L always carries with it God. That's why the name Allah means God. El-E-L, El Shaddai. Anytime you see that word, you've got the word God. But our God, Jehovah, Yahweh, is unique and the only God, whereas the gods of the pagans were composite, they were collective, they ruled the behavior of people, and they gave license for people. We've got different gods, but we also worship all kinds of gods in our own culture, even in today's world. So now let me read this to you again. Verse 3, you might read this a little differently. For he rebuilt the high places that his father Hezekiah had broken down. Watch this. He erected altars to the Baals, and made Asheroth, erected idols, cut wood idols, and worshipped all the host of heaven and served them.